All right, so a lot of the talk has been about September being a bearish month for crypto, but what if I told you there was data suggesting that this time could be very different? In today's video, I want to run through what I think happens through this next period in the market because there are some variables right now, specifically 4 variables which are significantly impacting the crypto market and its trajectory over the next few weeks and months. I'm also going to talk about some of my highest conviction trades in this environment and some of the altcoins that I've either recently taken positions in or I'm looking to add to my positions. So if you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel for daily crypto alpha and click that post notification bell so you don't miss a single video. I'm going to start with Bitcoin seasonality, then I'm going to get into my thesis, we're going to talk about the 4 variables, and then we're going to get into all of the juicy altcoin stuff, and I'm going to end the video by talking about a narrative right now, which is a very strong emerging narrative in the TradFi market, which has only just made its way over to crypto. So to kick off the show here, let's just look at what's happening in the market. Overall, the last week was kind of bearish and chopping. I know there's a lot of panic into the World Liberty launch. Hopefully my video helped a little bit. I said that although people think it's going to be a big extraction event for altcoins, the conditions are actually very different from the Trump launch, which would make this less extractionary. And since then, we've actually seen the market do okay. Obviously, on the weekly, it's down, but if you go to the 1-day time frame, you can see prices are actually starting to pull to the upside just a little bit today. And I'm going to get into the reasons why this is happening. This is actually something I predicted to happen yesterday. But firstly, I want to make a big announcement. I actually launched a brand new channel. So I do see the comments. Some of you say my videos are too long, and I don't want to shorten them too much because I do like giving you these market updates and giving you lots of, super up-to-date alpha. That's what I want this channel that you're watching this video on to be for. But I've also seen people really like my shorter videos. They really like my evergreen content, and I want to continue to do more of this. So as not to overload this channel with evergreen content and keep this more market focused, what I decided was I was going to start a second channel where I'm going to be posting regular short alpha-packed videos. So the first video I released is a 6-minute guide on how I take profits. This is my sell or exit plan for the entire cycle, and also how I take profits incrementally, my exact system on altcoins that I implement every single time I go into a trade. So if you're interested in punchy crypto alpha, this is basically going to take what I've learned over my last 6 years in crypto and condense it down almost into a series of videos. I've got videos planned on my best $1,000 portfolio. I've got videos planned on how I'd go about making my first 50K in crypto, the biggest mistakes that I've made in the market, how I spot and identify narratives, and they're all very short videos. So make sure to subscribe, link in the description below. There's a video dropping very, very soon. It should be over the next couple of days on Crypto Edge, and then regular uploads to follow. I think you guys are going to really, really love that channel, especially if you've been a fan of the shorter videos that I have been releasing on this channel. But this Mars Deutscher Finance channel is going to be much more dedicated to bigger market updates, and obviously I can cover a lot more time sensitive stuff. Obviously a lot of work goes behind planning for these videos, editing these evergreen videos, which makes the lag a bit greater, so you can't cover market sensitive topics, whereas today I've got some stuff and some narratives which are very market sensitive, so you never know, within a few days some of that might not be relevant. But I wanted to start here by talking about the Bitcoin seasonality, because there's been a lot of talk about August and September being weak months. Now historically, the strongest period in the market has been Q4 to Q1, so October, November, December, Jan, Feb, March, even April and May are pretty good, but June, July, August, September, these are the weakest months. So actually we are now heading to the very end and almost heading out of what's historically the weakest period in the market into the strongest period in the market. I will talk about why this time is slightly different and why maybe you shouldn't read too much into these numbers in a couple of minutes here, but just looking at the historical data, because I still think it's important to do, you can see that September is typically not the best month for crypto. And I think a lot of this, and I discussed this on the last show, was actually front run in August. So August was negative 6.5% on Bitcoin, largely, in my opinion, due to the fact that people were de-risking ahead of Jackson Hole, where Jerome Powell was speaking, FOMC, which is happening very soon. I'll talk about the likelihood of rate cuts in a couple of minutes, and also, of course, September. People were front-running the narrative that September would be a negative month because typically a lot of traders, institutions, they'll come back to their desk after the holidays, and then they will look to cut weak positions, add to strong positions, sometimes take profits and rotate and make all of these structural changes ahead of Q4 where they anticipate, greater returns are going to come. So that is when typically they move the magnets around, and that is why sometimes you see weakness in the market. But I was kind of fading this to some extent in the short term a couple of days ago in my free Telegram. Join, by the way, I'll leave a link in the description below as well because I post daily updates there. If you do miss these shows, they're like shorter market updates. I did a post on why I thought my short-term bias was actually bullish. Basically, I summed it down to the following factors. Gold is ripping, anchors Bitcoin higher. Obviously, this could take weeks or months to evolve, but it's a net positive. So if you look at the gold price right now, you can see it's actually broken out of a wedge. This is a wedge I actually highlighted on the show a few weeks ago. And from the breakout, gold's exploded 5% higher. Might not sound crazy in crypto, but for gold, that's a big move. And this is basically people fleeing to safety, fleeing out of the dollar. And I think overall, this is very good for Bitcoin because Bitcoin's almost trading as a digital gold. So the higher gold goes in terms of market cap, the larger the discrepancy between Bitcoin and gold, the higher the anchoring price on Bitcoin, because as gold goes higher, for Bitcoin to represent the same percentage of gold, it needs to reprice higher. And obviously for that to take place, the amount of capital that flows into Bitcoin doesn't need to be as much as gold because Bitcoin is a much smaller asset. So that repricing can actually be quite violent in Bitcoin. So if every 10% move in gold, you can see a significant move in Bitcoin. And that is why right now I find it hard to be bearish on Bitcoin from a macro point of view, because gold is still making new highs, stocks are still making new highs. You have trading cards ripping, like Pokemon cards. We're going to talk about that later in the video. That's a sign of froth. And we're also going to have potential rate cuts, which I'm going to talk about later as well. So all of these variables are stacking up, which made me think, you know what? Maybe September would be different this time. And maybe the bearishness maybe wasn't justified towards the end of August. The other thing I think that really signaled this, and I posted this on the day of the World Liberty Finance token launch, which we're also going to talk about later because I'm actually taking a trade on that, is the fact that alts actually failed to put in new lows. So it was a US holiday, which is typically the day that alts can dump due to illiquidity or pre-selling before US Open the next day, and stocks hadn't traded in a few days at that point. And World Liberty was launching, which everyone said was an extraction event, which because of what happened last time on the Trump token, was scaring a lot of people, and that's why we saw a bit of a de-risking over the weekend. But on the actual day, we saw alts actually holding up, and this was the first signal for me that we would see a market shift. And I said later in this post, trading is all about forming a percentage probability outcome and trading accordingly, the same concept as poker. So basically the whole point of trading is just developing an edge over time, consistently betting on that edge. Sometimes you're wrong, but you're just trying to be right more often than you are wrong and incrementally make money over time. So when you get these little intuition pieces right, that can help you with portfolio positioning and can be the difference between, heavily de-risking at a certain point and also actually adding to your positions or choosing to hold your positions at a certain point. So I think even if you're a long-term investor, it's very important to be aware of just what's happening at the current moment or what's happening for the next few weeks or the next month. Even if you're not, trading from video to video or day to day, it's good to have an idea of what's happening because you might make tweaks to your portfolio. Even if you're holding Solana and Bitcoin and ETH for the slightly longer term, you might do little things like de-risk at certain points and also add to your positions at certain points in order to develop an edge in the market. So those are the reasons why right now I'm not super bearish on the market. I actually think the risk reward skews to the upside. And if you look at the Bitcoin channel here, this descending channel, you can see that Bitcoin did put in a low, but it started to reclaim the bottom of this channel. It actually flipped the H4 money noodle as well, which was basically acting as a major resistance point, overhead resistance on the way down. We have had an H4 and an H1 flip. We've had a reclaim of the low. I think the really important level on Bitcoin to get ahead of is the 113.5 level. So we're going to find out a lot about Bitcoin and its strength on this move over the next couple of days because it's heading into a major level, and there's also confluence for this level on the daily noodle as well. If I bring up the line chart here, you can see that this has actually been a level of respect as well. You see we broke down here, we were trading under it, we reclaimed, we pretty much held the whole time apart from a little fake out here, and then as soon as we flipped at the end of August, we've been trading under it, and this has been a bullish to bearish reversal. So technically on the daily, Bitcoin looks bearish. On the low time frames, it looks more bullish, and then on the very high time frames, it also looks bullish. So what you want to see on the daily time frame, and this is more of like a midterm indicator, you want to see a flip of 113.5, which actually could happen fairly soon, and this also has confluence on the lower time frames. on the channel as well. You can see this is the prior high, and that also corresponds with the middle of this channel. So a lot of confluence pointing to 113.5 being that key level that Bitcoin needs to flip to exhibit bullishness. And we're kind of coming into an interesting zone as well on ETHBTC, because ETHBTC has basically been up only, but it's also started to show signs of weakness. So if Bitcoin actually reclaims 113.5, are we going to see a rejection here, or are we going to see a reclaim? If we see a reclaim, and this is a very important junction at the market, by the way, because if we see a reclaim when Bitcoin reclaims as well, that means ETH is outpacing Bitcoin. That means that the market is quite bullish and going more risk on. If we see Bitcoin pumping, but we see this starting to reject or just chop sideways, that is probably a sign that the market sentiment and liquidity is starting to go back in Bitcoin's favor, which could actually lead to a little bit of a cycle reset where Bitcoin runs. Ethereum probably won't drop. Alts probably won't drop much. They might just chop or, slightly grind higher, whilst Bitcoin takes the spotlight and eventually that, next rotation happens again. If this happens, I would be a fan of it. And I honestly think if it doesn't happen in the next couple of days or next couple of weeks, it probably will within the next couple of months, because it is important at some point that we get a cycle reset and Bitcoin actually takes the limelight again, because to create healthy and sustainable cycles, you do need Bitcoin to continue to go higher. If Bitcoin actually had put in its top, the issue with that, obviously Ethereum could still make new highs, right, in that 80 to 90 days following the Bitcoin peak and go on a big blow off and things get really crazy, and that could be really fun. But it's exactly that. It would be really crazy and fun for a short amount of time. Whereas if we keep seeing these rotations from ETH back into Bitcoin, back into ETH, this just juices up the valuations, which can keep the cycle going a little bit longer. And just as a side note, I don't actually believe we're in the 4-year cycle anymore. I think Bitcoin is now trading as a macro asset. It's much more similar to equities. It's trading much more similar to gold. I think the institutionalization of Bitcoin, the listings through the ETFs on the stock market have made Bitcoin more of a macro asset, and the relative impact that the halving has, because, the actual impact halves every single 4 years, becomes less and less and less. And a lot of that is more forecasted in the market right now. So people have learned to anticipate the halvings, and I think that's changed the market overall. I think the number one thing you've got to be looking at right now is not the Bitcoin halving or the 4-year cycle, it's the business cycle. So that is low cap equities, also gold, bonds. And as long as equities continue to make new highs, that's a strong signal that the business cycle is still intact. And if the business cycle is still intact, crypto will likely ebb and flow with equities. So equities might, outpace while Bitcoin stalls, but then as long as equities are in an uptrend and making new highs and the business cycle is still going, Bitcoin will likely outperform for a certain period of time, and it keeps the cycle going. So for me, I'm more tracking, equities and Bitcoin correspondingly as a macro asset. You can see equities just keep making new highs, right? Until there is a definitive breakdown and we start to see a downtrend forming on equities, I'm not going to be, bearish and start calling cycle tops. For me, it's business cycle first and then crypto second. Yes, crypto can be a leading indicator of risk, but overall, as long as the business cycle is in full swing, then I don't think we have anything to worry about. And risk reward, as I said, it's all about defining the percentage probabilities in your head. The market probably still skews to the upside. And also, another factor to keep in mind is that we're probably going to get a rate cut in September. So Benjamin Cowan here points out the fact that we are seeing weak job numbers, which could compel Powell to cut rates and pretty much lock in a rate cut for September. So if we do get a rate cut in September, obviously that is good for markets as well. Now, if you want to get technical, sometimes and often markets will front run rate cuts, but I think this time may also be different in that sense, because the rate cut has been such a point of contention. We've had multiple unwinds at points where we thought maybe there wouldn't be a rate cut. I never thought this, but at least a couple of weeks ago, going into Jackson Hole, the probabilities tanked to like 70% when they were like 90%. So when the market gets a bit spooked, you see that pricing happening out of the market. I think markets don't like being spooked. Markets like certainty. So at least locking in a rate cut, I think, would give the market just a little bit of calmness for this next period. And obviously, what Jerome says and the dot plot and all that will impact the longer term trajectory of the market. But assuming that's okay, I think that just opens up a little bit of headroom going into a seasonally stronger period in the market in general. By the way, I don't think September is necessarily going to be the month where we absolutely rip. Of course, that could be very interesting, and I would like that in some ways. In other ways, I wouldn't like that because I'm still building some positions. I'll talk about a couple of them that I'm building in just a minute here, because I think they're quite good trades actually. But overall, I do think I wouldn't be like heading into September super bearish. I think especially at that 113.5 level, that's the level to watch on Bitcoin. Now, two coins I want to talk about, and then let's get into the new emerging narrative. The first one is Solana. This is like an obvious one, but I thought I'd touch on it. We are seeing these rotations in the market from Bitcoin to ETH and now Solana. I think this is going to keep happening. And I think Sol is naturally viewed as that catch-up trade, like whenever ETH runs massively. And because it's a slightly lower market cap and it's actually more, I feel like, of a loved retail coin, I feel like the pumps can actually be a lot bigger than Ethereum. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think ETH still has more upside and there'll be times where ETH leads. But I actually did add to my Solana position recently. I mentioned this in my Discord a couple of days ago because it was showing really good relative strength versus the rest of the market. And I do think we push up into this range high zone here. I mean, this is the pattern that we're showing, right? We actually came off the range low at 130. We've held the noodle on the weekly. Price action looks really good. This is progressive price action, and a move to like $250 would set you up for potentially new highs on Solana. So this isn't one of my bets that I think is going to 10x in price, but it's certainly something that can give you strong price performance versus the rest of the market. And there are a lot of betas. There are a lot of Sol betas. You know, you've got the memes on Solana. You've got some of the betas I'll talk about probably in a future video that could be interesting plays as well if you want to get more exposure to that ecosystem. We're also seeing the DEX volumes on Sol do really strongly. You can actually see comparatively to Ethereum, Sol actually was the number one last week in terms of DEX volume. So I know the on-chain trench volume is down, but overall people are still trading a lot on Solana. You can see that it actually recorded its record since May with $144 billion in monthly DEX volume, which is quite strong. And as Smiley points out here, Solana is the strongest out of Sol, Bitcoin, and ETH over the past few days. And we've seen that whenever we've had a dip, Sol's actually rebounded the strongest as well. Jose, who's someone that I really respect in the space, a friend of mine and has been on the channel many times, he makes note that ENA, Hype, Pump, and Sol are also becoming very popular bets in the market. He says, I don't remember a time where the best tokens were so obvious or so consensus. And I do like all of these. I think ENA can still go higher. It has run its course a little bit in the short term, but if ETH made new highs, ENA would do well. It's shown the propensity to do really well in recent times. Hyperliquid, I still think can go higher, although I do think Pump on a revenue basis, I know it's, you know, a little bit more opaque, it's not as transparent, but on a revenue basis, it's actually doing relative to its market cap more revenue. And if you look at the buybacks as well, it should actually be outpacing Hype percentage-wise, but it's not as transparent as Hype, and I don't think the trust is there because Hype is like very decentralized on chain. Pump doesn't have that reputation, but I actually still think it can do fairly well, especially if your whole, you know, thesis is at some point the cycle, you know, has a blow off and Sol does really well and retail comes back for a certain period, then you could see those Pump buybacks actually being quite huge, even if their revenue gets like a third or half of what it did back last November. Then obviously Sol, you know, being the main anchoring bet there. You can also see in terms of mindshare change on Cookie. Cookie's a site that I use to look at the changes in mindshare, all the latest news, latest announcements. Pro tip, what I actually do every morning is I go onto Cookie Deep Research and I look at all of the headlines just in case I miss something. So you can see headline on Heaven, Fartcoin, Kaito, Ethereum. They've got pre-TG projects, so you can look at things that are about to launch. So this is actually quite helpful. And if you click on a project, you can also get more details about it and actually track its mindshare, track its sentiment. And instead of you having to use Grok, you can actually see the top tweets over the last couple of weeks on the right here for a certain token you're researching. So that's cool. And what you can see is Pump Fund and Solana have actually been gaining mindshare traction alongside relative strength, which is interesting. All right, let's get on to the next trade. Then we'll get into the emerging narrative. The next trade is World Liberty Finance. So this is actually one where my orders are about to trigger. And I did take an order at this at the 20-cent zone yesterday. And here's my reasoning for taking a position and adding to my position as close to this zone as possible. So there's actually this level here at the 20-cent zone, which is also the $20 billion FDV zone, where a lot of funds bought into World Liberty Finance. So I think they have a vested interest here to protect their MNAV of the price and actually keep it above this zone. So for that reason, I think that risk reward skews in the favor of getting an entry near this zone. Now, of course, it could technically go lower, but I think if it does, we'll see some sort of reaction. If we don't, you know, that could be an invalidation to cut the position. So for me, this is just a risk reward bet that, look, if the market heats up in Q4, I think World Liberty, which is backed and supported by the Trump family, and they're serious about it, I think we're going to see a lot more headlines, a lot more news, a lot more announcements, a lot more noise around it. And I do think this is early days. I think a lot of people are kind of, slamming the launch and saying it was a bad launch and this and that. But I mean, what did you expect price to go to like 100 billion overnight? The float was slightly higher than people thought, so that probably suppressed price a bit. But I do think as a leading narrative, it can be quite big heading into this next period. And look, if price action isn't good, if it did break below that level, you can make an assessment there. But I think there's vested interest here to actually have good price action on the chart. I mean, after all, it's the Trump family. They probably want to see this do well and will probably do what they can to make sure it does well. And if that's your thesis, like mine, that we do see this higher at some point, then I think it does make sense to start looking into some of the betas as well. A lot of the betas actually got hit very hard because typically what happens with these events is it becomes buy the rumor, sell the news. People get into betas in the run-up and then they'll sometimes switch their tokens on launch day for the main token, in this case, World Liberty Finance, or they'll close their trade, just before or on launch day, because they're basically realizing their trade. It's a classic buy the rumor, sell the news form of price action. So there are all these betas like DOLO and Block, which actually got hit, which I think could be interesting bets if this does come back. Because if this comes back and you start seeing big announcements from these protocols, they're probably going to reprice higher, and they've been smashed right now. So Block's actually one where I'm adding a little bit more to my position. If you don't know who's behind it, Matthew Morgan, the co-founder of Block Street, is one of the main advisors to World Liberty Finance, and he's also working with alts. So Block Street basically has an insider as their founder. So, I mean, if you put two and two together, I think there are going to be big things that actually come from this in the future once, World Liberty is established and once things are settled down. So I'm betting on that. And I also think the fact that we had a buy the rumor, sell the news event now gives us an opportunity to add to our positions, because it's always risky adding, in the lead up to a big event. You're kind of buying into the hype, whereas now that hype's out of the market on this and some of the other betas, I think now is actually the time to look to ladder in. You've kind of got to counter trade the market with these things, front run, so get in early before the trade, and then as the trade starts to realize, you can actually take the counter trade afterwards. So trying to sell the greed and buy the fear, essentially. That's basically the way to play markets, right? And then I want to finish off here by talking about the emerging narrative. And the emerging narrative that I'm seeing at the moment, look, it's not just emerging as a trend overall in the real world space, but in crypto it is, especially this week. And that is the trading card game space. So, Pokemon cards, I'm sure some of you trade them or hold them. I even bought a few in 2021. I got swept up in the whole craze when Logan Paul was doing all the box breaks. I bought a few Pikachus and some holos and stuff like that I've probably lost money on. I haven't actually checked the prices, but yeah, sure you guys are aware of that craze. This is now starting to crop up in crypto, which is actually quite interesting because there's this whole RWA ecosystem for collectibles, which is actually doing pretty significant volume at the moment. So there's actually been 400 million plus of NFT sales on the Courtyard website, which allows you to buy these Pokemon cards with NFTs for verification, which is absolutely insane. So actually using crypto rails to purchase Pokemon cards. And then you're also seeing transactions happening on these RWA sites, which allow you to basically lock your card in a vault and then make them liquid on a marketplace. So you can buy into a Pokemon card or buy one and get shares in that card, and then you can sell it. And you actually, and that card is actually backed. It's locked in the vault of the real underlying asset. So if you did have a card as well, you could actually lock it up and generate some liquidity from it, and borrow against it and actually unlock liquidity from an illiquid asset. I think as a concept, in terms of RWA as a whole, this is extremely interesting, and it's only really just started to make the mainstream after this collector crypt and the tokens called cards token actually launched and started to get a lot of attention. Look, I think this is a little bit of a coin flip at 50 million market cap. I definitely think it could go up, but it has pumped a lot in the past 24 hours, up 200%. I actually spoke about it in my Discord AMA yesterday. It was slightly lower at that point. I think it was like in this region here, but it's still massively up. So overall, I would wait to see where this settles. I wouldn't FOMO in, but I'm just making you aware of the fact this is quite an interesting narrative, and there are a lot of smaller competitors as well. So if this continues to, heat into mania stage, I don't think you should be buying Pokemon boxes. I don't know if it's early stage there. It's probably, late-ish stage in the cycle. But in that stage, this is where some of the crypto proxies and people that feel like they've missed the Pokemon, wave, they could potentially look at these tokenized projects to get exposure to that last, final blow-off leg in the market. So that's where I think this crypto narrative could be interesting. You can see the revenue across these protocols has gone crazy. It's actually a proof of concept that RWA can have real utility. I mean, this is 150 mil of volume. This is no child's play. So we're hitting like a new threshold in the market where there's actually real utility for these protocols. And I've been speaking about RWA for years, and now we are actually finally seeing it through stable coins, through treasuries, through stocks on chain, and actually through collectibles on chain. Like, this is real stuff that real people are trading on the blockchain, which I find really cool. And side note, the whole Pokemon craze is probably another indicator that the cycle isn't over, because, you know, that is basically a risk on indicator, and it actually trades pretty similar to stocks and Bitcoin as well if you look at the past correlations. I'm actually doing a video on this, so some of the protocols doing a bit of a deep dive and an overview of the Pokemon and the trading card game RWA meta over on Crypto Edge. So if you do want that and all of the other short, edited, punchy alpha packed videos that are going to be coming out on that channel, make sure to subscribe using the link in the description below. Would love to see you over there. And of course, I'll still be uploading on this channel as well, but this is going to be the place for all of my shorter, more alpha packed style videos. And I'm going to do a deeper dive that I'm actually recording tomorrow on this narrative, and I've got a bit more alpha where that comes from, but I'm going to save that for this video. Hope you enjoyed this market update overall. I'm going to see you tomorrow on the channel again, and have a lovely rest of your day. Peace out.